second episode of Made in Europe. The intention of this show is to explore what's going on in the European manufacturing space, and particularly this idea of a manufacturing renaissance in Europe as we see the geography of worldwide manufacturing starting to change. Our guests today come from different areas of the industry. We've got Markus Aschenbrenner from Zollner, Jürgen Thurner, who is a consultant and works with various different companies in the manufacturing space, and Didrik Bech, who is the CEO of Elmatica, a broker of printed circuit boards. So I'm going to ask each of you just to give me a brief introduction to yourself and your company, just kind of a 1-minute background. So Markus, perhaps we can start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Philip, for the invitation. So my name is Markus Aschenbrenner. As you already said, I'm a member of the board of Zollner. I have more than 25 years in experience within the EMS industry in different roles and responsibilities. All of that experience is within Zollner. Zollner, as you know, is a global EMS company with 20 locations, 11,500 people working for us in those locations. 1.5 billion in revenue, and we are serving nearly all of the industries which are interesting in EMS, having a focus on low volume, high mix, on complete systems integration and different services throughout all the spectrum of the product.
Okay, and it's certainly changing in the EMS industry, and sometimes I think EMS just doesn't really cover it in terms of terms now. When we look at the depth and breadth of services.
That's absolutely right, Phil. I see. Yeah.
Time to rebrand and rename the industry. That's something we've been talking with a lot of people about.
I think that would be valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, Jürgen, give us a quick 1-minute background on you and what you're doing currently.
Yeah, as Markus said already, thanks, Phil, for the invitation. I really appreciate that one. Yeah, I'm Jürgen Thurner. I'm in high-tech electronics business in my 33rd year now, on both sides, on the OEM side as well as on the EMS side. So on the OEM side, I started with HP, my career many, many years ago, Hewlett Packard in Germany. And then on the EMS side, I worked for Sanmina, for companies like Sanmina, for Flextronics, also for Mflex, being a niche EMS. And 10 years ago, I started my own business as a consultant with basically 2 legs. So my bread and butter business is, the first leg is I help OEM companies to find the right EMS partner when they start an outsourcing project. And the second leg is I help EMS companies drive up their operational excellence. So that's basically what I do. Besides that, I'm lecturing international operations management at the European School of Business for 9 years now. Enjoying this very much, just to give a little bit of my background, of my experience to young people, to really enthusiastic business people, the next generation of business leaders, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important part, Jürgen, and that whole sharing your insight and the education part is absolutely huge, and I think very, 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 very valuable. Didrik, tell me a bit about you and a little bit about Elmatica.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Stoten, for this invitation, and also Mr. Aschenbrenner and Mr. Thurner for joining us today. I guess I'm the rookie here. I've only been in electronics for 10 years. Apologize for that. So I'm sure you gentlemen would fill out my lack of experience. I'm working for Elmatica, which is actually turned 50 years this year. I guess I'm sure Zollner is even older. I remember actually I was down there meeting Mr. Senior, Mr. Zollner, actually twice, some 8-9 years ago, actually. So, but we are the oldest in Scandinavia, and we've been working with PCBs since 1971. Started actually with design, then production. But as I'm sure you know, production in the Nordic is not feasible anymore cost-wise. So we closed that down in 1983, and then went purely into what we call brokering, which is a very negative word, but what we're actually doing is we're securing the supply chain for industry leaders. Specifically these last 15-20 years, we've been specializing in the defense, in the space, and the telecommunication, aerospace, also a lot of medical delivering to 44 countries and focusing a lot on software and algorithms. So we have a quite big programming department where we program our solutions so we can integrate with our customers and also with manufacturing partners if they have the capability. So I would say we're 30% actually IT company. And what we're doing is, what is more and more about these days is actually securing data. I think that's one of the places where I'm sure we'll also reach that discussion today is critical for securing business also in Europe. And if people knew how to if they knew the responsibility they have with data, I think they would change their business operations quite significantly, which I believe is a huge trend coming to Europe. So we are only 44 people, about much smaller than Zollner, to put it gently. We're about $50 million per year, but that's purely PCB. So we only work with PCB, but from A to B, from development of the product to when it's finished. So we have a design department only supporting the customers. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think I watched some of your videos on YouTube and on your website, and I was pleased to see that you didn't shy away from the word broker, but you spend some time explaining where you add value and where it makes sense to actually do that to secure the supply chain. Delivery of PCBs is one thing, but I wanted to talk to you about delivery of cupcakes and dressing up in some kind of fur outfit and visiting your customers. What was that all about during the pandemic?
We quickly recognized, I was actually in Wuhan in December when the pandemic broke out, even though we didn't actually know that it broke out. But and when we came home, we quite quickly realized that this was going to be a quite lonesome time for many people. And then we wanted to do something within the parameters of what was legal, of course, to keep the mood up. So we went around to all our colleagues, delivered cupcakes with, of course, then the suit, if you might say so. And is to bring some laugh and some good mood. And I have no problem putting myself out there. I think it's very important for any people of management, or if you're a leader, not a boss. I don't like bosses. I like leaders, to go as an example for your one's colleagues and to give before one asks.
Yeah, and it looked like a lot of fun. It looked like it was very well received by your team. So respect for that. Kudos. I thought that was very well done. Let's start to dig into some of the issues. A lot of people are talking to me about a post-pandemic manufacturing renaissance, not just in Europe, but in some other high-cost environments. And I think there's a trend to shift supply chains, and perhaps particularly in certain elements of the supply chain, to reduce reliance on Asia in particular. Markus, are you seeing customers rethinking their manufacturing footprint and hence asking you to do the same? You're huge in Europe, but you're also a worldwide manufacturer, so I'm really interested in your viewpoint on that.
Of course, there's a lot of talk now to relocalize supply chains, to move into the geographies where the end customer product is needed finally. That's something which is all over the press right now. To be honest, I don't see so that many demands from customers right now to do so, because that's a matter of fact. We have that local for local strategy since already many years in our company. So you won't find any product in our Chinese facility which is transferred into Europe to be sold here in Europe. So our setup was already since many years to really localize the products in the geography where the products are finally needed. So that might be an issue why we don't see that many requests, because purely we don't have the situation with our sites that we use. But overall, I think there is a strong demand in really rethinking what the supply chain is, what dangers or what threats might be in the supply chain, and what does make sense to relocalize. That's for sure. I'm not sure if that's possible for all of the commodities in electronics. That's what I know, because there are so many investments needed. If you look at semiconductor industry, for example, or the PCB industry. So we turned down the PCB industry over the last couple of decades in Europe and moved nearly everything into Asia. So I doubt that there's really that it is possible to relocalize as it is in the media, in the press right now.
Yeah. So I guess it depends what you're making, doesn't it, Markus? And it depends what elements. Are people looking, I mean, have people always been looking at a China plus one strategy with you, or is it, you know, maybe it's Germany plus one, or maybe it's, you know, is it just quite organic in the way they choose their manufacturing geography?
I think they trust, a lot of our customers trust us where we choose what is the right geography to be, for the products to be manufactured. And if you look at our Chinese side, for example, so what we do over there is for local Chinese customers, and that's international big companies, but that's also local Chinese customers that we serve there. So I think there's a lot of trust in our relationships that we have, that we choose the right location for their products. And finally, it's always the question of what are the needs for the product, what are the needs for the end customer and the customers of our customers, in order to get the right subset set it up for those products and for those customers.
Yeah, yeah, and I think
that we did in the past and what we will continue in the future as well.
Yeah, to have that policy. Didrik, from a printed circuit board point of view, it's been in Asia for a long time. I mean, if you've been in the industry for a decade, you've pretty much known it as that's where boards are manufactured, and this is where they're delivered. Is that changing at all? Is there any pressure to have a more localized supply chain, or is it just a question of having a more secure and more agile supply chain, perhaps?
Yeah, valid question. It's like Mr. Aschenbrenner said, it's we see a tendency that people produce where the market is. However, when you speak specifically about PCB, I would say that approximately 65% is now produced in China. If you want to look at what's coming back to Europe, I would go by industry, and then start with the industries with the most compliance demands, which is obviously, which not everybody knows, is defense, for example, where there's specific requirements regarding weapons embargoes and so on. And I don't think everybody understands that a weapon is not necessarily a rocket. It is all the elements constituting the rocket. That means the PCB, that means the components and so on. So if you buy that in a country which is, let's say, EU embargo against, then you're breaching the EU regulations. So I would say this is the movement. I would say there's more awareness in the supply chain, also specifically what Biden and Trump and Obama has been doing regarding where it's actually things produced. It doesn't matter where you buy it, it's actually where it's produced. Mm-hmm. We see an increasing demand specifically these days, which typically would affect a company like Zollner, like, for example, the telecommunication industry. They have specific demands from the United States that is not allowed to produce in China. So, but they do the final assembly, let's say, in Europe, but a lot of the components might be from countries like that, and that can create, how can I put it, the compliance officers needs to be aware of where they are producing regarding the end customer demand. And I think this is the important thing, is that the end customer demands and also government demands, this is where it will, I believe, and I might be completely wrong, will start to affect the industries first. So you have the defense, you have telecommunication, you also have medical, and you also have documentation demands, which means more and more the customers, they want CO2 emissions plans of all parts of production, which not all productions even have a way of calculating this, but I think in the next 2-3 years, quite short, just as we are doing in Elmatica, we're calculating the CO2 of producing a PCB, because the CO2 footprint for the future, the customer will want to know, just like me when I'm buying, let's say, an Apple phone, I'm sure it's going to state on its CO2 emission 54.5 or something. This is 20% below or above average. And these things, with the focus on environment in Europe, I think this is the way the governments will, if they want to, can move business towards the sectors they would like. But it will not happen over a year. And Mr. Aschenbrenner knows all these things 10 times better than me, but this is my personal opinion also, but I think this is how we'll see movements through the specific sectors in this respect.
Yeah, so it's a lot about compliance. It's a lot about having that traceability and having that data in place, and that's what you talked about at the beginning, the idea of having as much data as possible in the supply chain. Jürgen, when you're looking at the supply chain and you're looking at selecting EMSs for OEMs, has the questions they're asking you changed in terms of not just in terms of geography, but also things like compliance and ESG and sustainability and that side of things?
Well, not really, because I mean, when I'm looking for the right EMS partner for an OEM, I always take into consideration what is the end product and what is the end market of the end product, because that has an impact on which partner you choose, which location you choose. What I see in general, and this is not due to Corona. Corona only made it visible, is that most of our supply chains are too long and not transparent enough. And if you look at Corona made it obvious. In March 2020, that was the first time when the Mercedes factory just in my neighborhood in Sindelfingen, they had to stop work because they lacked the supply of certain ECUs, electronic control units. And that was the first time, and the guys didn't know that they have a 7-tier supply chain for some of their ECUs, so 7 players in a row, and they didn't have the visibility always to the end. And it turned out that some of the chips came from the Wuhan area, okay, and that was the trigger for them to rethink their supply chain. And I think that's a general thing that's going on at the moment, that OEMs are rethinking their supply chains. I see a trend of shortening supply chains, make it more transparent. And then as a next thing that comes into play, what Didrik just said, CO2 footprint tracking, that will be a huge issue in the future. And it's of course easier the shorter the supply chain is and the more transparent the supply chain is. Yeah. So what I believe will happen in the next couple of years is that a number of manufacturing, of course, dependent on the markets, defense being first, medical being important, automotive being important here, that a lot of supply chains will relocate back to Europe, not to the very latest end, probably not to the substrate level, but definitely to the PCBA level. That's yes, as a trend.
Yeah. So the PCBA and box build, and obviously the stuff that does have the significant CO2 footprint. Didrik, when you look at the PCB industry, do you look at it and say, PCBs are coming way too far around the world, and that's a problem? Or do you look at it and say, actually, if there is a component that can travel the world with less impact, it is the printed circuit board that can be packed in very small spaces and shipped pretty economically. How do you see that?
In regard to, if you think just understand the question, do you think like where will the production change in the future, or?
Yeah, no, well, I'm curious what you think about the idea that if we're shortening supply chains are long for printed circuit boards. They're geographically distant, and they have been for decades. And PCBs were the fastest thing to move to Asia 25, 30 years ago.
But in this respect, also a lot of the laminate manufacturers, they're now based in Asia mainly. Of course, you have some others, but it's mainly in Asia. So it's even if we buy the laminates in Asia or some in the United States, and then we take it to Europe. So I don't see the PCB industry growing a lot in Europe. I think then it's rather a question for the future when we print everything. And I'm sure Markus can talk more about this. I started looking into the printing of PCBs and components 10, 15 years ago, but still we have not got that far. But I'm sure a lot will happen in the next 20, 30 years, but things take time. So I believe some demand will move maybe back to Europe. I'm more thinking actually South Korea and Taiwan, specifically in regard to compliance here. And I also agree with Mr. Jürgen is that shortening supply chains, but I think the key word, as you said, Jürgen, is actually transparency. It's I ask all our customers to always ask us the question, where is this being produced? And you need partners which are sharing all the data, because the data we receive is not our data. It is Zollner's data or Keytron's data or Flextronics data. So if you're transparent about showing everything where it's producing, then it will make sure that the product owner knows where things are being produced. And I think we also can say that it's been quite a focus the last 20 years. And I'm sure Markus can talk more about this, about price. I think price has been a driving factor, which is natural. I mean, we work in economics, but as far as I've understood, based on the limited knowledge I have, is that the machines for the PCBA is much more advanced now than 5, 10, 15 years ago. So I've heard several of our partners saying to me that processes or a PCBA, which was considered impossible 10 years ago because too much manual labor, is now actually, we can do it in Europe, in Germany, in Norway even. So if you go back 10 years in Norway, for example, it was only special industry advanced products. But now it's actually semi-advanced products because the machines are much better. And I've read some statistics where they state that the manual labor is down to 4 or 5% of the costs. And if it's 4 or 5% in China and then let's say 6 in Europe, does it really matter then? Then it might be more about security and having a closeness to production. And I believe I also read that the cheapest production you can have down the world is in countries like Mexico and Romania and so on. So I'm not even sure if, for example, China is the cheapest anymore. But of course, they have a lot of production of materials which you need then for the PCB. So I think the PCB is going to be about the same, but some business for key industries, I believe, will be moved back to United States, Europe, and specifically, I would say, countries in Asia like South Korea, Taiwan, maybe a little bit Japan, actually. It's not too bad. There's some very advanced PCBs in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, I think the very advanced stuff's always been made in kind of South Korea and Japan, and Taiwan's always had its part to play, and then you've got Malaysia and Thailand. So even within Asia, there's a shift, and it's not just about China, and we see Vietnam coming up as a major manufacturing region that seems to be doing very well at the moment and seems to have done a decent job of coping with the pandemic as well. So I think that shift is really interesting. Markus, when you look at it specifically from a European point of view, and actually when you look at this whole last couple of years from a European point of view, how important do you think the role of government is? And do you think they've, without saying whether you think they've done the right thing, have you been able to tap into support, and has that been valuable? And are they potentially pushing in particular directions to see manufacturing as part of their recovery?
I first want to come back to what Didrik was saying, because I fully agree with what you mentioned. I don't see the PCB industry coming back into Europe in really a heavy block, because what we have to look, if we look at the component side, and I name PCB now a component, is also the sub-suppliers. Where are they? What is the whole logistics behind, and what are related to that? And this is why I doubt that there's a lot of those components, and that's what I mentioned in the beginning, is really coming back into Europe. It's just not feasible.
No.
Despite, of course, there is geopolitical trends right now, looking at China, looking at US and Russia and Europe, that there will be some force, some power from the governments in some industry that products are reshored. I'm pretty sure about that. You mentioned, Didrik, you mentioned all the military stuff. There's also medical, there's other industries as well, which will be forced to set back manufacturing into Europe in a certain stage. And as you mentioned, I think it doesn't matter where the PCBA later on is produced, because automation, digitalization will lead to lower costs in manufacturing. There's no doubt about that. And this is why there is a possibility to get some of the products and some of the production and some of the value add back into Europe, especially, of course, then into Eastern European locations or Northern African locations, which are in close proximity to where the products are used. Coming back to your question, Phil, of course, during the pandemic, there was a lot of help by the governments. If you look at Germany, for example, with the short-term work program that we have, a lot of companies utilize that in order to come over the crisis and to keep the people in the companies. And that's the key thing. Then you're able to come back very fast when the demand is rising up. And that helped a lot, especially here in Germany, in the third, fourth quarter last year, because we saw the demand shifting already in half of the third quarter last year. And then we were able to get back the people on board in let's say, in a second, in order to get along with the demand. If you look then in other trends that we have, there's a lot of money, governmental money, which is free now, 750 billion of the European Union. There's a lot of money in Germany being spent to cope with the crisis, to deal with demands. And also there's a lot of subsidies in new technologies that we don't have to forget there. If you look at AI, batteries for electronic vehicles being manufactured here in Europe, the whole semiconductor industry on the other side, where there's a lot of money spent all around the globe, because most of the big guys in the world now see that beneath the data, there's also chips needed, and chips is really a very valuable thing there. So there's a lot of money spent now in order to relocalize, to deal with the geopolitical issues which are there, and that causes a lot of subsidies in the next couple of months and years, which will lead to reshoring some of those industries. That's for sure. And there was a topic which was already mentioned, is also the whole environmental thing, which is a lot. You see it in the news over the globe now. Even the US is spending or the Biden administration wants to spend a lot of money in the environment. So that will also push all the suppliers or companies which are in that industry and lead towards reshoring products to a certain extent. That will happen.
Yeah, and I think that idea of building back better, and you hope with any kind of reset that the restart has some kind of incremental improvement as it goes through that process. Jürgen, when you look at governments getting involved in manufacturing, do you smile, or do you frown, or do you pull your hair out and think they don't know what they're doing? How are we going to spend this incentive money wisely? I spoke to some people in the US, and they said that they should just reduce our taxes and let us figure out how to spend the money rather than try and incentivize us. What do you see them doing, and what do you think they should do? I'm gonna make you chancellor for 5 minutes.
Well, lowering taxes sounds like a good concept to me. Anyway, I'm not a big fan of statutory regulations, okay? Because I rather trust the forces of the market here. However, there are certain circumstances where it's unavoidable that governments jump in and make sure some things don't happen. What comes to my mind in this context is from January 1st, 2023 onwards, I believe, we will have this so-called supply chain law in Germany. Other countries like France, Austria, they have it already. This law the intention was to protect people to avoid child labor, bribery, corruption, and this typically comes out of apparel industries, also out of food industries. We have modern slavery in some supply chains. So this all is not driven by the electronics industry. However, the law doesn't make any difference about the products affected. So there will be a need in the future, even for electronics products, that we can prove how these products have been manufactured and where these products have been manufactured, and that will have an impact. Well, from the viewpoint of protecting people from child labor and bribery and everything, it's a good thing. From the viewpoint of the electronics industry, where you have typically no child labor, low corruption, low bribery, it might be a hindering factor in a way. So I think EMS companies need to be aware of that one.
Yeah.
Another aspect in talking about political things and talking about statutory regulations, another thing that I see coming up increasingly, it depends a little bit from a German viewpoint how the next general elections will end. But there will be, we see this from the Biden administration already, there will be increased pressure on the government of China in terms of human rights and violating human rights. And I mean, Biden is the first one who is already pretty clear on that one. Angela Merkel always tried to avoid that subject with Chinese leaders, but I'm pretty sure this will come up, and this will put special burden on companies sitting in China as far as transparency of supply chains is concerned.
Yeah. It's fascinating that every question I've asked so far, we keep coming back to transparency and that data being driven through the supply chain. It's hugely important. And I've talked at length about digital transformation, and you all know I'm a bit of an evangelist on that. I do believe this is an accelerant, but I don't know if we're seeing the dividend of that yet. Are you seeing Didrik, are you seeing a demand for digital transformation, more data, more traceability further down the supply chain from your customers? Are they asking you for that, or are you telling them they should have it?
Without being too blunt, we are at least telling them they should have it, because that's been a focus for our company for the last 10 years. But there's a lot of regulation out there which companies are not aware of, that, how can I put it, they're supposed to follow. So it's not our role to be the police, but we are becoming more and more stringent, and I'm holding a lot of seminars specifically on the compliance field, not only defense, but also so-called dual use items. That can be anything from aerospace and so on. Explain to people that one can no longer say, my product owner said this is okay. Every single company has their own, how can I put it, sovereign responsibility to ensure that they're keeping up with the licenses of that country. Yeah. Which means that you need to know what you're supposed to do. And I think it's no longer just like we've experienced huge companies going online buying, let's say, PCBs we're working on. And I'm saying, when you bought from them, do you know where they produced it? As Jürgen said, is it child labor there? Have you audited it? Have you seen the papers? Imagine if this comes out in the social media, that X company, I'm sure you know the name of this company if I said it, you bought online and you supported child labor in X country. I mean, people need to, I think the younger generation, I look at my children, they're coming home and saying, Daddy, I want to eat vegan. I'm like, vegan? Yes. It's like when I grew up, we had a Mercedes, and I told my parents, you have to wear the seatbelt in the front, because there was only seatbelts in the back, and they didn't wear that in the front. So I think the younger generation will also increase our demands. And yes, more demands are coming, but I think everybody, at least our business focus is that if you deal with us, you should know exactly what we're doing, when we're doing it, how we're protecting your data. And what we do see specifically is in the telecommunication industry, specific demands like this. We would like to know your cybersecurity plan. We would like to know how you're protecting our data. And we love these questions. And even though we have done a lot and we have a lot to do, we get very good feedback saying you come the furthest we ever of anybody we've spoken to. But I'm thinking, okay, we're not good enough yet. But when you look at all the businesses in Europe being closed down because of cyber attacks, and here you can actually see, I think what will affect Europe the most is actually a new regulation coming out in the United States, which is called the CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certificate. It is for anybody delivering to the US DoD supply chain. But it's not only that, because if you read through it, I was actually at Arlington Cemetery 2 years ago when they launched this by Katie Arrington, which is the CIS CEO of the US DoD, Chief Information Security Officer. It will soon affect all deliveries to the United States for both defense and public sector, which means if you have cameras, all kinds of, if you're, for example, Cisco and deliver routers and so on, you'll have to be a specific level within CMMC. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you cannot prove that, and here's the thing, it's no longer that you say we can do it. There will come an American auditor to your company approving you. And if you don't get the approval, you won't be able to give a bidding. You'll just be out. This is, of course, things takes longer time than what they think it was going to be. They launched it 2 or 3 years ago, and now it's the CMMC AB or accrediting body. It's improving every single month. But within 2023, 24, 25, I'm sure that Zollner and a lot of European companies will be surprised, not Zollner, but other companies, that this will hit us. If you want to deliver to one of the biggest markets in the world, you will have to be CMMC compliant. And I think NATO and Europe will adopt similar settings. According to the rumors I've heard, they were looking into it, which means that cybersecurity will be something you will have to prove in the future. No longer say, for example, in the United States, the last example, 65% I heard last year still haven't turned on their dual authenticator, which means, I mean, it's super easy to break into systems. So I think cyber hygiene is good for Europe and also good for bringing business back.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting when I listen to you talk, Didrik, you're really thinking about how you're adding value to the supply chain. And I think when you look at being a broker in the modern world and actually shifting from the term of broker to something that's really add value, all those elements are really, really important. And Markus, you were nodding your head through there. You've got operations in California. You're involved in the US manufacturing. Are you seeing that CMMC as a big demand, and is it something you're ahead of?
Cybersecurity overall is a big thing, because if you look at certain industries like the automotive industry, for example, you have the TISAX norm, which appears where all the OEMs are forcing the whole supply chain in order to sign off, in order to really have a certain level of cybersecurity available in the company. So that's a global thing which is there, and that's related to data, because everybody wants to have more visibility, everybody wants to have more data. That's for sure driven right now with all the allocation situation a lot, but there's also a lot of what I mean is there's a lot of lack of knowledge with some OEMs, and you just mentioned, I think, Mercedes in one of your comments that you made, in the whole electronics world, because they were not familiar with the electronics world so far, and now they have to dig into. So what they are looking for is really to have knowledge, to have transparency that supports the supply chain issues, the allocation issues that we see right now, but also supports then social aspects like carbon footprint. We talked about governmental issues, the restrictions which will appear in certain industry. So that all means you have to have a lot of data throughout the supply chain in more depth, with also more stages of pre-suppliers that you need to provide. And there, cybersecurity plays a big role, because that's valuable. That's also dangerous if all those data are coming along. And this is exactly why once you're in that supply chain in electronics industry, while you have to have a certain level of cybersecurity available, there's no doubt about that. Having a global footprint as we have, it's also very valuable or important to have that set up with a company or with subsidies in China, in the US, and so forth. So we need to do, or we have it in place, and we need to extend that. And that's a program that we are dealing with right now. Yes.
Yeah, you need to do an exceptional job on that. Markus, while we're on the topic of the automotive industry, there's some shifts happening in supply chains there. And I'm seeing companies, when they're moving their focus to EV, some are rethinking their supply chain, and some are leaning perhaps a little bit harder on the electronic manufacturing industry in a way that they perhaps would have previously done through their tier one automotive manufacturers. Are you seeing a shift there, and does that mean you've got to kind of step up with what you're able to offer them?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer in a short way, Bill, because there is a lot of things going on, especially in the automotive industry right now. The bigger portion of electronics in the cars makes OEMs rethink their strategy, and they're going more and more into all the electronic stuff. I'm pretty sure that they don't want to rely that much on their supply base that they had in the past. They are more and more digging more into the details in the component side. You know, if you look at the shortage situation that we have right now with car manufacturers turning down their facilities because of lack of components, especially in the chip market, they are aware that the electronics industry is different than what they had in the past with engines, with gears and all that kind of stuff. So they're rethinking their whole strategy. They want to have more knowledge about that. They're rethinking the supply chain, and they're more looking into those critical components. Meaning, if you look just at batteries, a few years ago, all the batteries were coming from Asia, and that's it. Now they reforce their suppliers to open up facilities in Europe. They dig themselves into those areas in order to set up own manufacturing capabilities for that key block that they have in the future in the cars. So yes, there's a tremendous rethinking, and there's new players coming up. If you look at TechCon, what they announced with some of the OEMs, with the platform they built for electronic vehicles, where there's more than 1,800 already users on that platform. So there's new players coming up as well in that industry. Huawei is investing into electronic vehicle market. So there's new things turning up. A car is not a car anymore. It's changing dramatically. So the value add is shrinking. So everybody has to rethink, what is my role in that whole game in the future? And that's starting from the OEMs down to component manufacturers, because, you know, right now we have a portion in the semiconductor industry from 8%, which is chips in cars. That will rise in the future dramatically. So that also the chip manufacturers, the foundries will rethink their strategy. Is it just Apple, or do we have also other that we have to serve, and how do we have to serve them? What do we have to offer?
Yeah.
So that's, as I said, it's not easy
it's
to
the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
way, you know.
Yeah,
Right.
no, it's absolutely the tip of the iceberg, and I think it could easily be an hour-long debate just on that. If
Absolutely.
on that. But I see it as a huge opportunity for the EMS industry to strengthen its bonds direct with the car makers, and that partnership, that product partnership, which I think is what we're moving towards, rather than just a manufacturing service.
And that's an interesting topic, Phil, because the EMS industry plays an important role there, because we have all the data. We have the data from suppliers. There's more visibility than we ever had in the supply chain. So all those data are in our pockets. We have demand signals from all of our customers in a broad industry range, and the demand signal due to the allocation is even longer now, because we have forecasts not just for 3 months now, we have it for 24 months now, which is really a lot of data which are in the hands of EMS companies. Not talking about all the technical documentation and all that kind of stuff that we have in our hands. So EMS plays a very important and a vital role in that whole industry.
Yeah, Jürgen, you're not just a practitioner of supply chain, but you're a theorist and a kind of an educator on that. How do you see that shift in the EV supply chain, and do you see it as a big opportunity for the EMS industry?
Oh, definitely yes, definitely yes. EMS sits right in the middle. If we take that example of automotive that Markus just mentioned, if you look at a classical automotive electronic supply chain, there is the car OEM, the BMW, the Mercedes, the Volkswagen, you name it, and they do co-developments of individual pieces with tier ones like the Boschs, the Valeos, the Magneti Marellis, automotive lighting, and so forth. And they themselves then go to the EMS industry to have those things produced. EMS owns the entire sourcing chain, if you will. And as Markus said, has all the data. They know exactly from where they can source the components best. And that supply chain then goes to Asia, and then it comes down on a component level. And also the component makers, they have their own EMS industry in the background. So manufacturing service companies that turn substrate into chips. So this is easily a 5, 6, 7 tier step. What I believe it must happen is that we said that earlier. The more nodes you have in a supply chain, the more vulnerable the supply chain is. What we need in the future, what we have learned from Corona, we need more resilience in supply chain, which means transparency. We have that already, but it also means reducing the number of nodes. So what EMS could do is EMS could either step up one step and go more in the role of the tier ones like the Valeos, the Boschs, and so forth, if EMS develops automotive knowledge, okay, and experience. On the other hand, as Markus also said earlier, the car makers, they need to gain knowledge in the space of electronics, also in the space of data. A car nowadays is something completely different from what it was 20 years ago. And it will be, in 10 years, it will be even more different, okay? So the car makers, they need to change as well. And at the end of the day, probably the technological development of individual components in a car is being left up to the tier ones, to the Bosch and to the Valeos. And the car OEMs become more or less service providers of mobility. whatever that means. And the EMSs could be the focal point of the value creation in the whole chain. But also each player has to think about how can we shorten the supply chain. Maybe we have to increase vertical integration. Could be one solution, but that's hard to achieve once you're already in a horizontal market, which we are in cars. But there will definitely be changes in the future. So
yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch, and we're already seeing kind of hybrids between ODMs and EMS companies in Asia that are making basically that will make the Elmatica electric car, if that's what Didrik wants to order. If you want to, create that, the model is there.
But I personally believe more in not fewer nodes, but more integrated partnership, because knowledge has become so specialized now. I mean, even with PCBs, we have people in my company which have been working with PCBs. They're 63 years old, working with PCB for over 55 years old. They started child labor in Norway a long time ago.
Yeah. that's where that child slavery started.
Yeah. And we are also running IPC standards. I mean, we are delivering the most IPC standards actually on the global level when it comes to PCB. But what I see as the challenge is rather something a little bit different. I see very smart people sitting late at night developing products, talking to their supply chain, not talking to their EMS, but talking to the contacts they have, buying products different places, and suddenly they have how can I put it, a very lucid supply chain with some of our key customers. What we tell them is that when you are developing when you start, okay, we're going to make this product, you should have a simple template which says, where did we sell it before? Where did we buy it? What challenges did we have? Then you ask all different people in your industry, and we contribute with time without paying for it, but we contribute together so we can, in the beginning, come with the input, the EMS, us, whoever's needed for that product, so they can make correct decisions in the beginning, because we see too many changes, and it's not the strategy for the supply chain. It just happens to be where it is. They choose this EMS or this based on price or us and so on.
Yes.
I think more control in the beginning of the process will give a better product, a cheaper product, a more resilient product, and a better supply chain in the end. So bring your integrated partners, just like, to give one example, I cannot share the name, you all would know it, but just yesterday, one of our huge German customers informed us that they had to cancel a delivery because they had redesigned the board for a new chip. And when they did this, they called the chip manufacturer, which you also know by name, and they had now sold the factory and they couldn't use that chip and they had to redesign back. And we had to go to fix
new version, this. Old version, backwards, forwards,
So I believe, just like Markus said, integrated the partnership where they are giving all the data to Zollner, so Zollner can go and make forecast and get commitment from the chip manufacturer. But in the past, nobody wants to. Sorry, it's really bad weather here. You might hear it outside.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Really rain.
Indicative of the industry. Storms on the horizon.
But I believe you must be willing to share this data, and the EMS has the most data without a doubt, and getting them online and securing the supply chain and being willing to offer transparency, say, yes, we are going to buy this, but now nobody wants anything on stock. Nobody wants any financial commitment, but that also weakens your supply chain. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think there's a case there where we need to get ahead in terms of design for manufacturing, design for supply chain, all of those things. The term that I've been sharing with people recently is this idea of design for disruption. Because when I first started as a journalist in the electronic manufacturing space, and even just 8 or 9 years ago when I did interviews with Markus and we talk about the industry, we were generally talking about fairly sedate changes and digital transformation and things that were happening quite slowly. Now all of our conversations just seem to be about this crisis, and then once we get past this trade war crisis, we've got a pandemic crisis, now we've got a component shortage crisis. So it seems that the only thing that we can be sure of is that we're going to have change and it's going to be unpredictable. So we have to have that design for disruption in there. The elephant in the room based on that is the component shortages. So let's hit on that. First of all, we've seen loads of press releases about TSMC building in Arizona, Global Foundries building in upstate New York. I saw yesterday that China were going to invest over $1 trillion in the semiconductor industry in mainland China. I think South Korea said they were going to, the South Korea government were putting 17 billion behind the industry. Do we need to build some chip fabs in Europe, Markus? Or can we?
That's a good one, Phil, because Intel going from to the EU, going into different governments here in Europe in order to evaluate how many chip fabs they're going to build here in Europe. So definitely there is a trend right now that there is more protectionism in the whole chip industry. Of course, that's a matter of fact driven by the whole trade wars and geopolitical issues that I already referred to in the beginning. So there is a matter of fact that there will be a lot of spendings of governments in order to bring back some of the chip industry into Europe or into the US. But if you look at technology in the chip industry, who is really able to do the most modern structures in chip manufacturing? It's Taiwan, it's TSMC, and it's Samsung in South Korea. So they are the only ones right now, at least to my knowledge, who are able to do really the small nodes from 7 nanometer to 5 to 3 nanometers. And TSMC just mentioned a few weeks ago that they're dealing also with a 1 nanometer structure right now. So and that's not just that you're going to build a fab and bring in equipment. That's knowledge that grew over the last couple of years, especially in those two countries with those two players there. And I doubt that it will be really that fast that all the others can keep up with this. And so yes, there will be some of that manufacturing brought back into the US and in Europe, and of course China has to put money in because they're cut off of technology right now, and also of the smallest nodes in chip sizes right now. So they have to invest. But I think that it will take really years until they will come to that level of competency, which is right now in TSMC and Samsung. And so it will be a mix. Yes, there will be fabs built up in the US, in Europe, and in China. They will deal with some sorts of components, but I doubt that they can really keep up that fast with really the technology which is already in Taiwan with TSMC and in South Korea with Samsung. So that's at least what I think.
Yeah, and how bad is it? How bad are the shortages? How much impact are they having on your ability to deliver on your book to bill? Everybody's book to bill is up because people are ordering further out, and it's hard to get stuff out of the door.
Yeah, but that's knock on wood. In the first half, we nearly had, or we just had small impacts there. I think that will be getting more drastic in the second half of the year. I'm pretty sure on that. Yeah. We will see impacts that will also hurt our revenues, of course, and hurt for most of our customers, because there will be some incidences where we can't keep with the demand, which is right now there. But demand is another thing. So I'm pretty sure that there is overcapacity, overbooking right now in the whole supply chain. I'm pretty sure about that. And the question is, when will that be released? That will be one of the interesting questions, and which will then help in order to release relieve the situation a little bit. But the second half of this year, first half of next year, there will be hard.
Yeah, continued constraint.
A lot of pressure in all the organizations, because what is the outcome of that? You have to shift manufacturing from one product to another in a second. The people are dealing hard with all the escalations that you have on the customer, on the supplier side, on the component manufacturing side. So it's you were out your whole team, and I have to thank our team here, because they do a great job right now. And if we can keep up with the base that we had, then this will be really a very, very interesting and very good year for Zollner.
It's a big task.
Despite all the hiccups that we see.
No, it's hugely challenging. Jürgen, are we going through kind of a bullwhip thing, and are we drifting back to that 4-year cycle we used to have with semiconductors, where we had undercapacity, build, overcapacity, or do you think it'll even out?
Yeah, well, I mean, the danger of getting into a bullwhip effect is always given. Especially the longer the development cycle of something is, the higher is the likelihood of getting into a bullwhip thing. To your first question to Markus, is there a tendency to get chip manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing back to Europe? I think there is, but it's clear that we don't have the technological capabilities like Asia has at the moment. So we would need to build that up, and that would take us a couple of years. If you look back at the 00 years, the first decade of the century, when all the PCB experts moved to China or to Asia, and today you can hardly find an experienced PCB engineer anymore. And Didrik, you may have it. You may have those remaining 20 in Europe, but the majority is gone. And very similar it was with the semiconductor industry. To get that thing back will take a few years, and that would power a potential bullwhip effect. It could be the case that when we have it back in 4 years, the demand goes down. Okay. If the market is overheated, as Markus just said, in terms of demand, book-to-bill ratios are up like 1.3 something, which is really incredibly good, and which is really hopeful. But if this is overheated, then we may run into a bullwhip thing. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? So 2 questions, Didrik. Do we build semiconductor fabs in Europe? And are all the remaining smart PCB people working for your company?
Of course, yes to both. No, but I do believe, if I'm not incorrect, I'm sure Markus and Jürgen can say this, that didn't Bosch open a semiconductor?
They did.
Yeah.
They did, right, in Dresden.
So I put it this way: if it's advanced and if you can make a profit on it, then it's the likelihood of moving it back to Europe is even higher. And I'm sure there will be the German authorities are usually quite good at supporting business. At least that's my impression. You know, my last name is Bech, so we moved from Germany to Norway a couple 100 years ago. So,
yeah.
Besides that, yes, of course, all the good PCB people work at Elmatica. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really excellent people, and I know also specifically at Zollner, your team there, Markus, is you have some very, very good colleagues there. But what we do see is that the knowledge about the PCB and the process and is dwindling at the ever increasing pace, just like you said, Jürgen. So, if you go back 34 years, it was just a 2-layer, but now I mean, there's some incredible materials and some incredible times, put it that way. Yeah. Like when you have lead time 48 weeks, you kind of like, okay, when are we getting it? You might just redesign. Yeah. But the knowledge of the PCB specifically is decreasing at an increasing pace.
And that happened with semiconductor as well, as Jürgen said. And that's kind of, that kind of brings in that whole topic of talent and recruiting talent. Is that something you've struggled with, Didrik, or are you able to get talent, or do you just constantly work on internal training and building your own talent pool?
We have a lot of internal training, and all our internal training we also give to our customers, which means we hold a lot of seminars.
Yeah, because you did the IPC thing.
It's going to be online, so people can just take it and call us, because we believe in this is sharing knowledge, not keeping knowledge. It's good for us and good for the industry. But we've been lucky. I might say that every single person I've had the pleasure of asking to join our company has always accepted. So I might say that I do believe we have quite a good reputation. So the people we contact, they have a tendency to start working for us. But we're not big. But sharing data, we have 10 people working full time for free, actually only servicing our customers regarding their specific requests, not asking for anything in return. But of course, we all know how the world works. So we believe in giving first and then maybe having opportunity afterwards to show our value. But
it's karma, Didrik.
Yes.
What goes around comes around. I absolutely believe in that. On a completely different scale, though, Markus, talent is a huge thing. You talked about the government incentives earlier in our discussion and how they have enabled you to keep staff available and be able to switch things back on. Is talent something that you're concerned about in the future? And if the European industry is to grow, is there enough talent coming out of academia to keep you guys going?
I think that's a very good topic to talk about, because we talked about the hindering issue of supply chain right now and the allocation situation, which is hindering of growing and dealing with the demand which is out there. The other portion is labor force. So we're really struggling in getting enough people in order to deal with the growth that we see. And that's not just Germany, that's all over Europe, that's also in Europe. That's also, in the meantime, if you look into the US, that's a big issue over there. And so labor force is a key thing on the one side. So we have a lot of open recs right now and that we can't fill. And talent is another issue. And you're absolutely right. And I agree to what Dirk was saying. It's hard to get talented people in. So this is exactly why and that's what we're doing since years already. We have an extended training program. We train our people internally to grow talents within the own organization, bring them on certain levels in order that we can deal with exactly the fact that talents are hard to get. And what is coming off school is also not the amount of talents that we right now need in order to really deal with the growth and deal with also the needs which are there, not just in growth, but also in
capability.
Because if you look at data, for example, what do you need now? You need data analysts, you need data scientists. They're really hard to get. So what we do is we collaborate with universities here in the region in order to get the guys, when they are going into that area, already on board. So that's what we deal with in order to cope with those talents, which were not in our scope 5 years ago. But that's
absolutely
with in order to deal with the future,
and I've said this for years, that we're training students at school for jobs that might not even exist yet, and trying to figure out you've got to make them open thinkers, you've got to make them free thinkers and capable at analysis and figuring all those things out. And there's going to be a whole bunch of new jobs and roles in the future. Jürgen, you're very much into that education side of things. You can only train so many people. Do you see a massive hole in the education system in terms of fulfilling the needs of the manufacturing space?
I see a lack of supply to stay in the terms on the technical side. Yes. Yeah. So we have too few software developers. We have number one. Number two, we have too few people understanding hardware. We have plenty of people who study economies. We might have too many of those. There is a if I look at the German market, also and not only to universities, but also the one step before to the high schools, there is. I'm in that situation because I have two girls, 22 and 18. The 18-year-old just graduated from high school. I think there was, when they had in the 10th grade, they had to decide which way they want to go for the final examinations, and out of about 190 students, there were like 3 who subscribed for computer science. Okay. And I mean, that's a really, really bad ratio. So the problem starts in the high schools already, or maybe even before the high schools. We need to raise, with our children, the interest for technology. Yeah. That's what I see. Because otherwise we end up with 99% of those who leave universities being economists, which is okay. We need economists, but it doesn't help our technology going forward. And at least Germany is a technology country. Europe is mostly technology driven, less than agricultural driven, I would say. So we have a need there, and we need to do something, but it has to start in schools. If you look at universities, it's too late.
Yeah.
Yes, if I might add something there, I follow politics, even German politics. I don't understand our politicians. I mean, we have spoken for the last 15 years about how important the data is and computers and so on. And I'm not sure how much you have of this in school in Germany, but I do have 3 children in Norway, and I am not impressed. Even the few courses we have, it's difficult to get your children into those courses. Why aren't we focusing, I mean, seriously on education regarding programming and so on? The kids also like it because they're used to all the apples and all the things, and they're used to programming. I took my girl, which is 12 years old, to work, and we put on a very special app, Google screen, and she showed me things which none of my colleagues have ever been able to do. She did it in 2 minutes because for them they're used to this.
They're digital natives. Yeah.
Yes. Why can't we spend more time on our children, getting them ready? I mean, getting Europe ready, or the world ready for that sake. I mean, we're all one world, we're all brothers and sisters, which just from Africa a long time ago, at least I think so.
Yeah.
Some more focus on education, and the kind of education which we need for the future would have been great. Not all, I'm also an economist, but we don't need many of me. It's enough with a couple.
No, it's a balance, and there is a lack of people coming into that STEM side of things. And actually, when you run the numbers, those jobs are pretty well paid, and they're pretty well rewarded everywhere in the world, but they don't seem to be as well thought of as perhaps they were in the past, and certainly not as well thought of as they are in Asia, where the percentage of people choosing to go into computer science is going to be much higher than the numbers Jürgen mentioned earlier. I am going to wrap up there, guys, because I'm conscious we could talk all day, and much as we might enjoy that, it might be a bit of a long show for our viewers. So we'll wrap up there. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for taking part. It's been not just a pleasure, but a lot of fun to talk to you guys, and look forward to chatting again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.